to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I am your host, Sean McKinda.
And I'm your host, Jackson Keller.
I have no idea what that accent was. I don't know why you sounded like you were in a rodeo there.
I got that Brooklyn rage. I'm walking here.
That has nothing to do with anything.
Because I was going to try and say something clever in Japanese, but I'm not confident enough in my Japanese skills. Okay, Sean, you've outed me.
Well, listen, we're here this week to try and finish the whiplash that we created last week. Because if you've been with us for a while now, we have gone from The Birds to Independence Day to Tokyo Story, which should be a solid bit of whiplash for anyone who is joining us.
Now, listener, I know what you're thinking. What the fuck is Tokyo Story? You know, what weeaboo bullshit has Jackson brought to us today? And yes, Jackson, we know you're responsible. That's what you're thinking, right? Well, yes.
He's not about to betray your expectations here. This isn't going to be some plot twist where actually Sean suggested it, because no, of course not.
So I had never heard of this movie before we started doing Quarantine Classics. While I was doing research for the Citizen Kane episode, and, you know, research with the heaviest finger quotes you can put on there, I had stumbled upon, like, you know, just kind of a list of other movies that are considered classics, that are considered you know, the best movies of all time. And in particular, I think it was the Sights and Sounds like poll. There were two separate polls. The critic poll, of which Citizen Kane was the winner, and then the director poll, of which Tokyo Story was the winner. And I had never heard of this movie. Everyone I've mentioned to going up to this has never heard of it.
I've never heard of it, and I spend my life on film Twitter. Like, that's not to say that film Twitter is great. Don't get me wrong. Film Twitter mostly circle jerks about like two movies. But I feel like there's always those fringes that come in and be like, hey, you know, you guys should probably watch something before 1982. And I figured someone might have at one point or another said, hey, what about Tokyo Story if it's this like long heralded movie? But yeah, I had never heard of it either. Part of the problem with that could just be that we're really bad about foreign language films in America. Sorry, continue.
I think that's true, because it's not like I mean, it's not like I found this because of like my weeaboo circles, right? Like, anime fans aren't like losing their minds about Tokyo Story, right? But
I mean, it could be like one of those sad porn animes, like a Silent Voice or something, right?
I you know, there's a few comparisons to be made here to some animes, but you know, maybe we'll get into that. But I found this while looking around about Quarantine Classics. I'm like, hey, I'm a big fat weeb. I love sad dramas. I love classic movies. And given that we needed stuff as we continue on in this horrible hell pandemic world, this was my suggestion. We flipped a coin, so you're getting Tokyo Story this week. It's really, really good.
I'm not surprised that it was good. I was gonna say I'm surprised, but I'm completely not. It's a very, very good movie. I'm gonna put some heavy asterisks on that just from a more personal standpoint. But from like an objective standpoint, I'm gonna say that yeah, it's beautifully shot. It's a very interesting movie. It engages with its themes and ideas in a very open-handed way that leaves a lot up to the viewer to decide, which is both a blessing and a curse. I think that it is a very interesting way to go about things, but also, to quote someone, I don't remember who, I know people who use subtext, they're all cowards. And that is kind of the definition of this movie. I was left going, wow, that was really interesting, and it's got a lot to think about, but also, you didn't really say anything definitively one way or the other, so what was the point of this art? Because, you know, art's about expressing beliefs and whatnot, and you kind of felt like you just waffled on some ideas before ending the film. That's my loose review of it. I'll let Jackson take over for a little bit, because my fuller review is going to go places.
We're gonna go places this episode, probably both of us. So
enjoy the void, y'all. We certainly won't.
Yeah, this one's my fault, gang. 100% in every way. This has got my grubby fingerprints all over it. So as expected, I really, 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 really liked Tokyo Story. I might have loved it. I suspect that I will only love it more and think about it more as time goes on. This is coming pretty hot and fresh off of finishing my first viewing. And my first viewing was not ideal. I had to split up my watch. There was a lot of like background noise and distractions. So this is the first movie on the Horsecast in a long time where like I really want to sit down like soon, like very soon, and watch it again in better conditions, like in the middle of the night, preferably in like a room with air conditioning. This movie, rich with theme, excellent subtext, just so many fucking layers, like an ogre, like an onion.
And there we have it. We have just compared a masterclass film to Tokyo Story.
Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba. But, yeah, so Shrek.
I just totally killed all your momentum, didn't I?
That's fine. We're rolling with it. So that said, like, I think that just by the nature, my reaction to this, I'd compare it to my reaction upon my initial viewing of Easy Rider, though I was more like genuinely mixed about that movie. I was also younger, so I don't think I really got it, but I think that like with a movie like this, as compared to even other like quarantine classics that we had been doing that I have all thought were excellent movies, like Citizen Kane or Casablanca or Seven Samurai, like those movies are big. Those movies are about big things. Citizen Kane in particular, just because both have been crowned best movie of all time by the same poll. Citizen Kane is a big movie about like big ideas. I mean, it's mostly just, it's not like an action movie or anything. Like, like Seven Samurai, I don't know if I'd call that an action movie, but you can, Seven Samurai at least you can claim is an action movie. It's about war. It's about violence. People die in it violently. And Citizen Kane too, even though it is a drama, it's like a drama about like the great men of history, like, controlling the population like a puppet through their, machinations. And Charles Foster Kane lives in a madman's like mad scientist palace castle.
It's almost like musical quality in that regard. Like it's very big and bombastic.
That is something that like this is the complete opposite. There is no bombast to this. Like probably less, like when you think slow drama, like low key drama, like there's probably even less than you're expecting because contrary, my fellow weebs, I'm speaking directly to you here. Contrary to what you might think if you watch a ton of anime, Japanese people don't actually like scream dramatically all the time. Those are cartoons, as it turns out.
Wait, no, that's not true. Cartoon's real. Cartoon's real.
Strap on that headband, boys. I'm gonna, give you some bitter truths here. Japanese culture in real life, as it turns out, is very reserved, very much focused on suppressing emotion and not standing out. Generally speaking, obviously, I'm overgeneralizing. An entire nation of people here, but. I think even Japanese people themselves kind of have self-described the culture like that. I think it's a fair statement.
It's far more collectivist than individualist is basically what it boils down to. And that is not a generalization. That is just how it works there. Like,
yeah, it's a well-observed thing. So with that, this movie being about what it is about and taking place when it does, like it's not just that this is coming from a more collectivist, more kind of reserved sort of cultural tissue. It's also older. It's coming out of like post-war Japan, which was a very a lot of somber reflection you have to do there in light of a lot.
And when they said it was 8 years ago, like the war was 8 years ago, and this movie was set in like 1953, 1955, I knew that was World War II. And I learned that because we talked about World War II in movies on this podcast. See? This podcast has done good for Sean History Brain. Sean learned good now.
Shooting star, the more you know. But yeah, so this is definitely not a movie for everyone. We were making some comparisons in the pre-discussion, and I think that the closest one, the one that rings the most true that like came out recently is Roma, the Alfonso Cuarón film.
Yeah, Roma is you can feel Tokyo Story's influence on Roma, honestly. It's got a lot of kind of similar listful shots, a lot of just quiet moments, a lot of very small personal stories. There's a lot of echoes of Tokyo Story in Roma. So if you've seen Roma and you know what that's about, and you know that you're in for a long movie of kind of just quiet introspection and staring deep into the world, hey, it might be your thing. If that's not what you are expecting or what you like, you might want to find a different movie.
Yeah, because even like in Roma, not to give any spoilers to either film, but Roma ends in a very big, hard-hitting way. In a way that, like, this movie kind of has that, but, and you know, this might just be a factor of, like, age and distance, like, how hardcore, so to speak, you're allowed to be in a movie has, you know, gone a long way since 1953? Is that when this came out?
53 or 55, I don't remember which right now, but I want to say 53.
I think it was 53. So, if you're expecting... Even when the movie gets more explicitly dramatic, that drama is still very, very understated.
And for context, it is 40 minutes before the end of the movie. So, like, you get a small uptick in drama before it settles back down pretty hard.
Yes. And like, if you're like me, very early on, you're going to be trying to figure the movie out, and you're going to say, is this movie literally going to be these two nice old people, you know, having mundane conversations with their shitty children for 2.5 hours? And it turns out the answer is yes.
Yeah.
And so you know from that description whether or not you would be into a movie like this. I was into this movie. I enjoyed it a lot. We're going to go more into the details, like post spoilers, and I can elaborate why, though if you're familiar with our body of work and, you know, look at a plot summary of the movie, it probably won't be too hard to figure out. I think that, I didn't walk out of this saying, like, this is the GOAT movie, this is my new favorite movie, what have you. There is a strong chance that, like, given a couple months, a couple years, maybe, like, I don't know, I could see this one really sticking with me. That's my piece. That's what I'm gonna say. Pre-spoilers. I have spoken.
So allow me to take over then and kind of fill in my piece with the pre-spoiler discussion, because I think that there is another side to this movie as well. Jackson has done a very good job of setting up what the movie is and what it's about, and you can probably already start to glean some themes and ideas from it. And if you are like me and just kind of trapped in a rough headspace right now with everything going on, the world falling apart, COVID, if you don't have a job, as I kind of don't right now. I've got some weird opportunities that I'm working on, but nothing concrete. So, you know, I have that little bit of nerves going on as well. This movie might raise some questions that you're just uncomfortable with. So I could see myself absolutely adoring this movie. This could entirely be like my new big favorite movie. But I didn't let it. I think part of that comes from the fact that I watched an interview beforehand, and this movie is on the Criterion channel, including a whole bunch of extra Criterion stuff. There's an interview with some of the people, there's a documentary about the movie, there is audio commentary, and there's kind of like a short little, here, let's talk to somebody about why this movie should be in the Criterion channel. And I like to watch those little interviews before I watch it if they're available. So I watched this interview, and the gentleman was talking about how this movie made him want to be a better grandchild, and how this movie made him really cry and really upset with how he has treated his family and everything like that. And I saw that and went, interesting. I'm excited to see where this movie goes. And then slowly felt myself put the movie further and further at arm's length. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that this movie, if I had let it in, would have really, really fucking wrecked me in a lot of ways. And not because I view myself as a shitty grandchild per se, but because I view my life as a spectrum in which I can always be better. And I am working on so many things that I am trying to be better about right now that I feel like this, had I let it in the way that it wanted to be let in, would have shaken loose a few new things for me to be constantly worried and anxious about. And I don't think that I have the mental bandwidth to handle it right now. So take basically everything I'm going to be saying from this point forward, and everything I've said previously about what I liked about it, where I thought it had failings and shortcomings, and recontextualize it with a little bit of, yeah, but I probably would have liked it more if I had some more bandwidth to put to it. Because I genuinely think I would have absolutely loved this movie, but there is so much else going on with my life right now that another sort of earth-shattering change would have broken me. And I think my brain kind of recognizes that, and it was like, hey, you should probably kind of zone out this final third, because even zoning out and kind of half paying attention, I felt myself kind of welling up with some emotions, and I'm like, oh fuck, oh no, this full attention would have fucking destroyed me, huh? And I think for my own mental health, I needed to acknowledge that and kind of put a little bit of distance on it. And I apologize as we get into spoilers. I think it's going to kind of become clear as to what that says about me as a person, as to what that says about me as a character. But I also am genuinely so concerned with so many other things right now that I'm like, listen, I'm not a terrible grandchild. I love my grandparents dearly. I love my parents dearly. But like, whoo boy, I desperately need to work on fixing my own shit right now, and I am so sorry about what that entails across the board in that regard. So I love y'all, and keep that in mind as we continue forward, because as I said, this movie has the potential to absolutely wreck people who see themselves in the film, or who are people who are susceptible to things that make you kind of take a second, look inside and go, oh fuck, could I be better in this regard? Because that is absolutely who I am. And if you don't have the bandwidth to take that introspection under consideration right now, maybe skip this one, because it might weigh on you in ways that you are not expecting it to.
You know what's funny? I think that everything you're saying is completely valid, of course, and that if you feel similarly to Sean in this is just overwhelmed by COVID in your personal life, and if you're not going to get anything from making yourself vulnerable like this in this particular way, I think that's totally valid. And Sean, while you were just talking about this just came to me that, like, given I think once we start to talk about the actual movie in more detail, I think that this statement I'm about to make is going to surprise people, again, who are familiar with me and my body of work. I did not get super emotional, and I think that says one of two things. Either that I have become really, really good at handling my shit, or I am completely broken and dead inside. So, we'll let history be the judge of that one. But yeah, we've danced around it long enough. I think. Do we want to get into spoilers?
Let's dive into spoilers. But before we do, as always, if you're enjoying the podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes, tell friends, and you know what? Follow us on Twitter at BADH_cast. If you really like the podcast, you can support us at patreon.com/BADHcast. Follow Jackson on YouTube. That's Jackson Keller. Like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube bullshit. You know, it feeds the algorithm. Nom, 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 nom. Next week is going to be my pick, and it's going to be backfilling a director that I have not watched enough of. So we're going to be talking about David Fincher's Zodiac. We were thinking about watching The Social Network, but given everything that I just said, and given the state of our world and Facebook, I don't think that I want to handle that. I might watch it for context, but you know what? I'm not going to sit here and talk about it for an hour. I might have a mental breakdown.
I think that's fair. I have not seen Zodiac. I've seen a fair few Fincher movies at this point, but Zodiac is not one of them. And David Fincher's a great director, so this should be good. This should be interesting.
Yeah, pretty excited for that. For now, though, let us return to your regularly scheduled void staring, because of course we're going to stare into the void. Art is a reflection of the artist, and we are nothing but hollow husks fueled by, I don't know anymore. What are we fueled by? Let's talk about Tokyo Story. That got away from me, didn't it?
And now back to Real Sad Boy Hour, starring Sean McKinda and Jackson Keller.
Hell yeah. So how do we want to talk about Tokyo Story? I think that's the big question. I have a list of themes that I kind of want to talk about and how it kind of waffles with it. But I don't know if you have something that would really work better as a starting point.
I think because we were particularly vague in the pre-spoiler section this time about story details, I think that's a good place to start, because I'm sure that'll drum up some debate. But real quick, I just want to take like 3 sentences and summarize the movie. This movie, I was being kind of glib earlier, but this movie is literally 2 aging parents go and visit their children from their, home. Like, they live in their hometown. They go see them. They're all living in the big city of Tokyo. They just have little incredibly mundane, like, day-to-day encounters with them. The parents, the children are really shitty to their parents, but in like a low-key way, like trying to get rid of them and not paying enough attention to them and being too busy. And then after some malaise in the middle point of the film, they go back home. The mother falls ill and dies, and that's basically the plot, as it were. That's your 3-sentence summary.
Well, and I can tell you what, I'll summarize it even better with a direct quote from the movie at the end of it, which is to say, isn't life disappointing? Yes, it is.
This movie ends in a really dour place.
I had kind of checked out at that point, and I actually rewound the movie to rewatch it because I'm like, I was not paying attention, and again, I genuinely don't know if I had the mental fortitude to handle it at that point. Isn't life disappointing? Yes, it is. Is wretched, to be perfectly honest. It is a dark reflection. It is a black mirror, if you would. And I'm not right now. Just not.
Let's talk about waffling, because I have a feeling I'm gonna hard disagree with this, so we can debate.
Yes, let's talk about waffling. To be fair, I don't know that I would fully describe it as waffling. I think that's just the best way I can describe it, because the film kind of is of a multitude of minds, where it is presenting a bunch of ideas, a bunch of themes, and then Not really taking a side on any of them. It really does leave it up to the viewer to make a final decision. The movie is very clear about, we don't spend enough time with our elders. We reject them. We send them away because we're busy with our day-to-day lives, baseball games and work and shit like that. And honestly, the baseball game quip is kind of the outlier of the whole thing. It kind of felt very different compared to everything else that was going on, because for the most part, the reason that these people are sending their grandparents to other homes, to other people to deal with, is because of work. And that feels like a shitty thing to do, especially because the one character, the daughter-in-law, is strictly speaking being like, I can take off work to hang out with my parents-in-laws, and I'm not even, strictly speaking, married to their child anymore. He died in the war, which I learned was World War II because I paid attention to the podcast. I just need to pat myself on the back there for a minute, and also lighten the mood, because I feel like we've set a very dark precedent in this podcast so far.
Yes.
But the movie also does put a lot of stock in the grandparents being like, oh, our children are disappointing. The millennials, and by millennials, I do mean, I guess, Japanese baby boomer generation-ish?
Not really, actually, if you think about it, because they're all adults. These would be greatest gen, because if the younger son was the one who died in World War II, being old enough to fight in World War II is the defining feature of greatest gen. So yeah, their kids would probably be boomers.
So congratulations, me. I clearly still do not understand history. Yes.
I mean, to be fair, generational lines are pretty arbitrary, so that's not super important.
If you permit me to get real for a second, generations are fucking stupid. They're made up and they don't mean anything. Stop fighting across generations. It's all arbitrary and dumb and made up. Everyone is from something. Fuck you. Sorry, I really hate generational arguments just across the board.
It's funny because I cringe really hard when I see people go really hard on the generational stuff. I've been guilty of the occasional okay boomer meme like anyone else.
I mean, we make jokes about that on the podcast. We are absolutely guilty of it, but
I know a lot of people who put their entire stock into either being their entire identity is either being a millennial or trying to not be a millennial, and it's super fucking cringe, guys.
Oh my god, it's the worst. Just be people. Why do we have to put labels on everything? All right? Honest to God, fuck off. Fuck generations. Fuck everything.
The only generations I care about are Sonic generations.
Fuck you.
It's my turn this week, Sean.
Oh boy. So yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing, is that the grandparent is disappointed in their greatest generation kid for not, living up to expectations and working so hard but not getting anywhere. So it's this kind of weird juxtaposition of, I want my children to spend time with me, but they're working too hard and they're lazy and don't respect us, but also they're not living up to my expectations thing. And that's interesting. And again, I wouldn't call that waffling on themes, as I put it, but I don't really know how else to describe what that is, because it is kind of an inherent contradiction with what it's saying. An interesting one, I will grant it that, but it doesn't really come down on either side at the end here. It just kind of feels like it's condemning everything, which, you know what? Also fair. If you want to play it that way, if you just want to say fuck everything, burn it all down, retweet.
Contradiction is a good word. It's an interesting word, because at various points on this podcast, we have both, for one movie or another, we have criticized a movie for every possible angle when it comes to theme. We have criticized movies for being too simple and on the nose. We have criticized movies for being too vague and muddled. We praise movies for being really complex and multifaceted, and we've also praised movies for being really tight and straightforward. So what is the line here? The answer is that, film is subjective. There is no line. That's the secret sauce we're selling, kids. But more generally speaking, I think that there is a fine line And I think genre has to play into it too. I think there is a fine line between something examining contradictions that are inherent to sort of human behavior and not coming down real strongly, either because they want to leave it up to the viewer's own experience, death of the author, as we were talking about in our bonus episode, pay us money.
Heyo. And hey, you know what? Lindsay Ellis, she released a new video about that, and man, it was incredibly similar to ours. And you know what? I think she's secretly a patron, or someone is leaking our patron videos and she's listening to them. That's the only explanation. There is no way in hell that we have just been longtime fans of her content and have in fact aped a lot of her style and ideas. That's no.
That's not something we cop to in said bonus episode at all.
No.
But plagiarism aside, not plagiarism by Lindsay Ellis, plagiarism by us. Let me make it clear.
We're not slandering Lindsay Ellis. Please, we love you. Don't sue us.
We cut off our pinky fingers for Film Senpai. But getting back to the point, so I think there is a fine line between movies either again because we're purposefully leaving it up to audience interpretation, or it also is a question of there are some questions in this world for which we have no answers, including the director and the writer. And I think that you can feel that a lot of times when the creator has posed a question that they are unable to answer. And that can be really satisfying in its own right. And I say that genre plays into this too, because again, what is the line between something like that and something being just a muddled, confused mess? It's hard to say. I can make particular arguments for individual films. I don't know if I could make a statement with a broad brush. And I will make my argument for why this feels very purposeful and very intelligently done and sort of rich with subtext. But, as far as why did you criticize this other movie, kind of comes down to in individual metrics. Some people see things in movies that other people don't. And, sometimes what's an interesting contradiction to one person is a confusing, stupid mess to another.
I do want to jump in really quick because I'm not, even myself, I am not sure whether I am fully criticizing this movie for having these contradictions. I think it's interesting, but it's also I think I just kind of quietly crave some sort of idea into what the director is feeling. But I think the reason that part of this contradiction works so well is because it feels natural to human nature. And I think a lot of that is perfectly encapsulated in the bar scene where the grandfather is drinking, and you can feel the contradictions within him and his own kind of conflict about what he is saying and what he believes. Everything about this, I wish my children didn't work more, but I'm disappointed in them, feels like something that people themselves would feel and be conflicted about. So this contradiction doesn't feel like something that the movie is asking without an answer as much as something that the movie is conflicted about themselves. That is not something that has a clear answer, because fuck, man, we're asking that even now, honestly. America's a hellscape, y'all.
Well, not just America, because it's also important to point out that this Japanese work culture thing, very particular to Japan.
No, absolutely. I'm speaking from my own experience in that regard.
Of course.
Because I have never been to Japan, and I feel like to speak to Japanese work culture, despite the fact that I have a vague idea of what it's like just from a variety of media that I have consumed, would be stereotyping and also unfair in a lot of regards. Though, to summarize it as capitalism is a nightmare, I think does a nice job of it.
See, I mean, it's not just capitalism, because it is very particular. And I say this because I think it's relevant to the movie. It is very particular with kind of Japanese national identity, broadly speaking. Of course, again, we don't want to stereotype here. People are people no matter where you are. But I think there's definitely a reason that while yes, people do work themselves to death in all capitalist countries.
Hashtag all capitalist countries matter.
Hashtag all capitalist countries matter. But it seems like, if not only, but like maybe Japan's not the only one, but it's one of the few that is having a big like population problem. Like people in Japan work themselves so much that like they're not even, Japan's answered that question. They've said fuck families at this point, basically. Just go and work your job to your death. And that's why like the declining birth rate is famously like a big problem over there right now. And I think with that sort of modern context, it's interesting looking at this movie and seeing how that plays and how that adds to the richness of the characters. And that, like, I think I really agree with what you're saying about the bar scene. I think what that comes down to for me is that, like, the old man, I don't even know if they say his name at any point, do they?
I think they just refer to him as father all the way throughout.
Yeah, it's weird because all the characters have that sort of relationship with him, all the important characters anyway.
Even his wife just refer to each other as mother and father the entire time, I believe. It could have snuck through. I'm terrible at names no matter what, but
Yeah.
like you add in like a language barrier to it too, and whoo boy, baby, am I out.
So father, then we'll just stick to calling him father. But like that, I think that's what makes him a rich character, and that he's so obviously like a very kind, very like understanding man. But at the same time, like he does still, like when he's confiding with his buddies at the bar and they're all like shit talking their kids. And his impulse is to like try and stand up for them, even though as an audience we've seen that like, you know, they don't necessarily deserve that generosity. But, and I think that's what makes it super interesting when he kind of doubles down, and his problem with them isn't that like the or at least his stated problem, right? At least the problem that he's explicitly saying isn't that our kids aren't spending enough time with us or not paying enough attention to us. His stated problem is that our kids didn't work hard enough and they didn't rise to meet our expectations. And like, you know, as a character, he's clearly caught between that. And I think that subtext of like, because this is a movie with like, it's hard to ignore the cultural backdrop of like post World War II Japan, right? Like a real time of like cultural reckoning for a lot of reasons that, you know, not gonna get into super deep here.
That's a history class right there.
It sure is. But in general, like broadly speaking, there is this sense, and you can see it in like a lot of the early movie is framed, like, you know, look at the beautiful countryside, whereas we see a lot of like ugly industrial blight, like Tokyo, you know, as a modern, like our modern perception of Tokyo might be that it's this really clean, really beautiful, really efficient, like tech modern city.
I was shocked watching this as to see how Tokyo is represented, because I was genuinely expecting it to turn around and be like Persona 5-esque Tokyo, where it's all gorgeous and everyone, you know, kind of operates in almost like a clockwork fashion and everything is smooth and pretty and nice. And instead, it looks like how we, you know, make commentary about American cities, specifically like Rust Belt American cities, where they are gross and rough. And I can say that having grown up in Cleveland.
It looks like Cleveland. It looks like Detroit. It even reminds me of like how we culturally we present like Victorian era London, you know, like Industrial Revolution London. And that makes sense because Japan as a country was like literally rebuilding everything more or less after the war. And so we're in a time of, you know, I think that's really important to the movie, this setting, this time of crisis in terms of like national identity. I don't think it's an accident that like mother and father like spend most of the movie in very traditional like Japanese attire, whereas the kids wear a lot more like Western clothing. I think that that's very purposeful. So like there's this feeling that like we are passing like from the old world, from the old way of doing things, like and crossing a threshold into a new world that, you know, maybe we don't necessarily like. But I think that what this scene at the bar, what makes it crystal clear is that like one of my biggest concerns going in, like as a modern viewer, as like an outside viewer, which I wasn't super worried about because it is like so acclaimed, but I was worried a little bit about like the good, the bad, and the ugly syndrome of like how much is this movie, like you kind of get the feeling early on just from the shots of like grimy Tokyo, like, oh no, are we going to be pining for like military dictatorship Japan here? Like, are we pining for like return to the glory days, right? And it's not so specific and like harmful as that. And I think that the movie, even in some ways, kind of addresses this idea that like this old world that we imagine isn't necessarily perfect because, well, what makes the kids so, you know, distant from their parents? Like, it is their jobs, it is their work. And that is an expectation set upon them by the previous generation. And even though father is a kind man, you know, we see him getting really drunk and being really vulnerable. And it's hinted that he has, it's never outright said to be abuse, but it's implied with like some alcoholism.
I mean, that right there does say a lot about like the transition of generations, just because, I mean, alcoholism is usually associated with like periods of strife and hard times, and like that's not entirely true. There's a whole lot of other elements that go into alcoholism. I am completely generalizing addiction, which is an incredibly dangerous thing to do, and I apologize about that. But in the language of a lot of films, you know, addiction stems from periods of rough times, and alcoholism is especially one of those tropes, like looking at detectives and shit like that. So this previous alcoholism really does stress that the old times really weren't that much better, and that potentially they've gotten better because he got over his alcoholism. Again, this is extrapolation and does not reflect reality. I am stressing that because alcoholism is a serious thing and I don't want to make light or overly generalize, but I think it's worth mentioning just in the context of film and how you would understand and read films.
Yeah, it's a narrative tool, and we're talking about it as a narrative tool unless as like a thing that actual people like suffer from, you know. I think there's a distinction.
There's a very big distinction. Again, one that I just want to stress for clarity's sake, because if you're unfamiliar with like using things as narrative tools, it might come across as me just being like, addiction's just a thing. Who cares? And I'm not saying that at all.
But I think it is important because it does add a lot of texture to father as a character, because so much of the early movie is like, you know, oh, like, you know, look at the nice old people, and I think that like that's what settles in and like makes the characters feel so real. Like there is a lot of distance, there is a lot of like understatement. Part of that might just be the distance of culture, both in terms of time and, you know, national culture. But regardless, these characters still feel very much like real people, and these sort of conversations are a big part of that. Another favorite of mine that sort of gets at a contradiction is at the end when their youngest daughter is talking with the widowed daughter-in-law, who has been a lot kinder, a lot more generous to the mother and father, and the daughter says like, well, I can't believe my siblings are such pieces of shit. I can't believe they're already like gunning for my mom's clothes, and like they left without even saying a word. Like I will never grow up to be like them. But, you know, kind, sweet Noriko's her name, I think.
Yeah, that sounds right.
She is the one who, you know, tries to, you know, shed a little more light on their humanity. Like, well, hey, I'm sorry, like, don't judge them too hard because that's just life. Like, you know, you can't dedicate yourself entirely to your family. Like parents and kids, like, just naturally got to drift apart someday. It's just something that's got to happen. It's just how the world works. And yeah. And I think that tension between what we see of, like, you know, the poor treatment of the parents, but also acknowledging the parents' point of view, because this is something that they say to Noriko time and time again, is like, you are wonderful to us and we love you, and that's why we want you to like move on. And yes, this is done in a very particular, like, gendered way of like, we want you to find a new husband, but the sentiment is still there of we want you to move on and, like, you know, live your own life and, like, you know, start again. Like, please don't feel obligated by grief or by, you know, family bonds to dedicate your entire lives to us. Like, you are your own person. Your life is your own, Mob.
Ooh, I wasn't expecting that reference, but you know what? Holy shit. Real talk, my phone background is still "Your life is your own." I love that line from Mob Psycho so fucking much. Mob Psycho 100, if you have not watched it, hard recommendation from this podcast.
Mob Psycho 100 is a great anime, god tier fucking anime. Watch it. But yeah, I think that like those dueling perspectives and like trying to like that is really like an impossible needle to thread. Like, it is true that we should be kind to our parents and kind to our families, and like, we all want to be good children, parents, brothers, sisters, whatever, but we are also at the end of the day our own people, and with our own responsibilities and our own problems. And that's how do you thread that needle? You can't really. You could only ever do your best.
I'm sorry, I just got an email notification that a place called Rod's Western Living has viewed my application, and I do not recall ever applying to this place because it does not sound like any place I would ever apply to.
That's amazing.
Sorry to, totally detract, but I am also genuinely trying to put some lively spins on this episode because we have spent a lot of time looking into the void in general in this podcast, and like, oh my god, we need occasionally some levity in this. So you know what? Thank you, Rod's Western Wear, for the boost this episode.
Do you imagine Rod, like I do, looking like Doug Dimmadome, owner of the Dimsdale Dimmadome?
I imagine Rod as Rod from Birdemic, and that is the only Rod I can ever imagine.
Rod from Birdemic with a cowboy hat. Oh, how about you meet me halfway?
You know what? I would watch that movie. Do we have anything else we want to talk about with Tokyo Story? Like anything else really chomping at us? Because I mean, I genuinely have been trying to interject some humor occasionally, no matter how forced it might seem, just because, oh boy, does this episode need it a little bit. Like, I hope listening to what we have been talking about, you understand where both of us were coming from in this pre-spoiler discussion, because we both dropped some heavy shit, and I think that our explanation should have sufficely explained why we were kind of bummed out and struggling with this movie, and like are going to be struggling with this movie for a while to come.
God, it's funny. I can already feel my esteem for this movie grow like after this conversation. That's how I always know when I'm really into a movie, is like after I walk away from the Horsecast episode going, man, that movie was even better than I thought going in.
Yeah.
I think it's great. It's like, I mean, I don't want to drag things down even further, but given just to elaborate a little bit for why I said, because I'm sure some people are wondering why I truly become a monster and what that meant.
That is true.
So I was kind of surprised myself that like this wasn't like a really raw gut punch, just because in addition to the obvious, ongoing grief quest about my dad, my grandfather, who had been living with us under the same roof for a few months, also passed away during the course of this COVID thing. It wasn't from COVID, but so like I think in some ways the fact that just in my own life, like the questions that this movie poses were inescapable. Like I had to, I was doing some real fucking wrangling, and I think that weirdly enough that I had to confront that shit, like put me in a position to like engage with the movie in a way that didn't leave me completely like emotionally dead. So again, like I don't know, maybe this is for you to judge. I am either like incredibly like emotionally mature, or I am completely dead inside, and that's up to your own interpretation, ladies and gentlemen. So
how we were talking about like conflict and how the director can't seem to answer their own question, and how we have said many times that form follows function on this podcast. Well, here it is in action, y'all. Choose your own path.
Form follows function, baby.
If you choose that Jackson is dead inside, please turn to page 58. If you choose that he has emotionally grown and become a full, functional adult, turn to page 112.
Hero side story and dark side story.
I've been Sean McKinda. You can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda, where I don't tweet sad things. I mostly just tweet about movies I'm watching and things that I like, and the fact that I slowly look more and more like Anton Chigurh because I have not gotten a haircut in months, and I hate it so much.
Having seen your face as a result of like various things over like Google and stuff, can confirm my man's got strong Anton Chigurh energy right now. And that was the greatest tweet I've ever seen.
I've taken to wearing hats. I'm not a hat person.
And I'm Jackson Keller. You can also find me on Twitter at Jackson J. Keller. Fuck me. But you can also find me on YouTube. If you're not listening to this on YouTube now, I just posted a video about ukulele and Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts. That's not heavy at all. I talk about capital B in that video, and that's the opposite of heavy and meaningful. And I've also got a thing about not by the time this goes up, but probably the day after, probably Friday, I'll have a video talking about Paper Mario and why it will never be good again. So stay tuned for that.
Ooh. I want to pitch something else that I've got coming up here. I have a very kind of not really introspective, but a very interesting look at body horror coming out on 25 Years Later site next week. It'll be out on next Wednesday, I believe. Get ready for that. That one took me some places that I wasn't expecting it to, but it also should shed some light on just how I view body horror in general, because it's a very weird way to view body horror, but also exactly what body horror is about. Get ready for that one. If you want to follow the podcast, though, you can at BADH_cast on Twitter. If you want to support us on Patreon, that's patreon.com/BADHcast. Only $1 a month gets you access to our Discord, where you can like check out some memes that our patrons have been posting and like be like, ooh, look, they're talking about Death of the Author outside of their episode and just kind of debating things that are going on. At $5 a month, you get access to our Discord as well as our backlog of bonus episodes. So if you want to listen to us debate Death of the Author, there's a great place to do so. And you also get a shit ton of other really, really good episodes. At $10 a month, you get access to all of that. And you can be like, hey, I want you guys to talk about something else. So if you want us to talk about a movie, or you know what, we're open to taking more like, I want you guys to talk about broad stroke stuff. Let us know. We'll talk about it. It also gets a little something something.
Julia, Travis, Pat, Mom, Aunt Summer. Arigato gozaimasu.
I really thought you were about to like give them a secret spy mission there. Like, you are the best of the best. We have brought you into this room to inform you of the next heist.
See, I was thinking, while I was saying that, I was thinking this sounds like Earth, Fire, Water, Wind, Heart. By your powers combined, I'm a beating a dead horse stallion.
Well, also, thank you to Lords of the Highway for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide, alternate take off them, high acting, low expectations. They're a wonderful band. You should go check them out wherever you can, be that iTunes, Spotify, whatever. Buy their music, stream their music, whatever you gotta do. Just support them in some capacity. Also, thanks to 25yearslatersite.com. Not only am I a writer and their audio editor there, there's a bunch of really good stuff that people write on there, like better writers than me, or like talking about Twin Peaks and shit. It's great. We've got a little logo on their site you should go click on, but you should also see what else they're doing over there. It's good people. Next week, we're going to be talking about Fincher's Zodiac. I'm pretty excited about that one. It's less of a whiplash than going from Independence Day to Tokyo Story, so it makes some sort of sense.
We're all about the whiplash. There's no hope for us. We had a choice between Saint and Grunch, and we chose Grunch real hard this week.
I also, just as an aside, if you are still listening to this right now, I want to say thank you, because this is an episode that I feel like was very, very good, but no one is going to listen to because no one knows what the hell Tokyo Story is. So this is a little Easter egg for you, listener, who has gotten this far.
This is like our hidden gem. Like after we've died, the great scholars will go back And this will be heralded as like the masterpiece of Beating a Dead Horse, the most influential podcast of all time that regardless nobody listened to because Tokyo Story is not a movie anybody knows.
Bye.
Ciao, matane!
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go